Welcome back to the podcast. I am doing a bunch of Superman centric shows, and this time around, I have Keith Williams, who's an inker. And among his many inking projects, he was an inker for John Byrne, both at Marvel and at DC, where he inked Action Comics for a while. Keith, every time I have somebody on the podcast, the first question I ask them is, what's their origin story? What got you into comic books and made you a lifelong fan?
I gotta say, it was early in my childhood. My grandma would bring me comics whenever she would come over, usually on the weekends. And the first book that she actually did bring me was a Batman book, number 184. Actually, it had Batman. I think Batman and Robin on the cover. It was a probably Carmine Infantino book. It had some kind of weird webbing going on. I think on a hotline phone or something. But that was like the first time I really read a comic. Before that was just basically comic strips and things like that. And it got me hooked. And every weekend she would bring me more comic books, and I got more and more hooked. It was basically DC, I guess, at that moment in time. It took me a little time before I was able to pick up a Marvel comic book, which is a whole different thing. But yeah, that's what started me out, and I love the artwork. And I don't know, for some strange reason, it was a compulsion that I felt like I wanted to draw. And I wanted to create my own characters, things like that. And fortunately, I had another friend. We lived in the projects, and we would hang out in the hallway of our second floor apartment building part, and we'd draw comics and write and draw comics. And the desire to do it. My friend went off to do other things, but I stuck with it.
So tell the fans a little bit about Keith Williams. Who are you as a person?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just quiet, believe it or not. Sometimes, like a lot of other artists do, they're like solitary. We love doing our work. It's hard work. It's not really easy work. And then once we leave the cave and go and visit our family, we try to keep a relationship going with them. And I like also hanging out with friends, especially, like when me and my wife, we would go to conventions and things like that. And that's our chance to be sociable.
So you went back in the day to the School of Visual Arts in New York City. How important was that to you as a creator, and what lessons did you learn while going there?
I got to tell you, the whole reason why it was so weird because I had a choice between Joe Kubert's school. These are the two places I was thinking of going. Either Joe Kubert's school because it was just starting, or School of Visual Arts. And the thing is that School of Visual Arts had one major thing in there. I know Joe Kubert, he was there, but in School of Visual Arts they had Eisner, and I got really hooked on the Warren magazine spirit revival that they had. They started putting together all of his old comic strips and putting them into the magazine. And I love storytelling. I love the style of his artwork. I love the way his face, like the way he makes his faces look. They're very emotional, very moody. You could feel like emotion in his characters. I just love the storytelling. So I said, yeah, that's the guy that I would definitely want to go to school to have as a teacher. It was a slight ordeal to try and get into his class. I wasn't anybody special. One of the times that he was in his class, and I had a contract with God with me, I believe, and one of the first graphic novels, gave him the book and asked him to sign, put his autograph on there, and was also continuously telling him how much I would love to be in his class. So he took the book, he signed the book, and as he was signing, he says, "This is how you get into my class." Great. I felt like I made the right decision.
What was Will Eisner as a person and as a teacher?
Oh, he was great. He was very personal. And when we would go to his class, he would ask us things like, what's new in comics? What's new out there in the comic book art world and stuff like that. And we would be telling him. But I always felt like he always actually knew. He just wanted us to tell him what we saw and how we saw it, and thought that was pretty cool. And also, he would look at all of our artwork, the stuff that we would put together for his class, and would show us how we were going wrong and how to fix things. He would do corrections. He would actually draw on our piece of art, which kind of like for us, our egos at that time, being kids, college kids, saying, "You can't do that. Are you kidding? We spent a lot of time on that." This is what we're telling Will Eisner. we we finally got to the point where we got him a pad of vellum, which is see through, so that he could actually lay that over the artwork, so that he could draw on that instead of drawing directly onto our artwork. I wish I had those vellum pages now. I don't know what happened to them. He had a lot of corrections on my stuff. But I was thinking of him more as a teacher than as oh, I should save this stuff because it's going to be worth something in the future. No, I didn't think that at the time, but that's the way it goes.
So was it Don Perlin who helped you get into Marvel Comics? What type of role did he have in your life?
Yeah, that was really interesting. I worked as a supervisor of school shows at my old high school, South Shore, which had a great art program in it too. It's a major art program. It's really great. And the shows were called Sing. So there was competition between the different grades, and they would paint backdrops and do electrical lighting and all this other wild stuff. And I was there even after I graduated. I graduated in '76. And it always drew me back there. One of the years that I was working there, for one of the grades, I met Howard Perlin, who was Don Perlin's son. And I guess I was showing him how to do backgrounds on 16 by I don't know how many feet pieces of canvas, like for stage shows. And he knew that I was into comic books, and he asked me if I was interested in meeting his father, Don. And I said, yeah, sure, of course. And little did I know that Don lived about 2 blocks away from me. That they lived not that far away from the projects. So I was able to go over there, and I brought the Marvel tryout book that they had back then. It was blue lines of John Romita Jr.'s artwork in it. And I inked some of those pages. So I brought that with me, and I showed it to Don, who was very nice, very patient. And he saw that I had something going on because at first I wanted to be a penciler, but then I said no, like I'm really not ready for that. I could be an inker. I could work over other people's artwork and maybe correct and stuff like that, but I couldn't do it to my own stuff. I don't know why that happened, but that's the way it worked. So I showed him the pages, and he thought it was interesting, and he had me come over a few times and show me how to use certain tools and stuff like that to get certain effects. And I was actually at that moment in time working as a paraprofessional at my old school, South Shore, and he called me up and asked me if I was interested in doing background work for an inker at Marvel. He said that he's got a lot of other work to do and he needs some help on doing the backgrounds, which are like just doing cars, trees, everything except for the figure work. And I said, yeah, absolutely. That was my foot into the door. He arranged for me to go up there, and I met with, at the time, I think it was Danny Fingeroff, who was doing the Spider-Man books. And he gave me Marvel Team Up, which had Mike Esposito as the inker. And I think Jim Mooney was the penciler on that at the time. And he had me do the backgrounds on that. I took him home, did him up really quick, tried not to mess it up, and ended up getting the job. He was my mentor before I got in before I got into the business, and he brought me into the business.
So along the way, you were also an assistant editor with Christopher Priest as the first Black editorial team in Marvel's history. Did you guys realize at the time how important that was and how significant that was?
I think we were both thinking at that moment in time, wow, we're on the flagship books of the company. Spider-Man was it at the time, and that we didn't want to mess it up. The thought of being the first black editorial team was in the back of our minds, and we just wanted to actually do a good job. Jim came over to me. I was working as a Romita Raider at the time. I was the first Romita Raider, actually. And I was thinking that my career was going to go in the direction of maybe working as an assistant art director, maybe. But when Jim came up to me and asked me that, Spider Man was my childhood hero. I watched the cartoons and all that stuff, and like to actually work in an editorial office, I just said, yeah, I should try that. So it was a really cool period of time that I was at Marvel.
So why did he ask you of all people?
Yeah, why did he ask me? I think it was basically to have a black assistant that would possibly move on to become like most likely another editor up there because there wasn't really any black editors up there. I'm trying to remember if Dwayne McDuffie was there at that moment in time as an assistant. I'm not sure. I think that came a little later. Yeah, when he was, I think he was working for Archie Goodwin. He was working for one of those two. That, I'm trying to remember. That's all mashed together there. But yeah, I think that was the reason why. And the funny thing is that I didn't really talk to Jim that much before that time. He was working in Larry Hama's office as an assistant editor at that period. So that was like the first time I really got to know Jim.
So, when did you start working with John Byrne?
Ah, John, that was another. I don't know how that happened. Actually, I do know how it happened. Mark Grunwald, who was the editor of, I don't think he was the editor of, was he the editor of She-Hulk at that time? I'm not exactly sure, but he came up to me because I worked on so many different inkers as a background inker that he thought that I would probably fit with John. I worked with Joe Sinnott. I worked with a bunch of different inkers at that time and probably thought that it would look good. Like when he asked me, I was like stunned. I've loved John since Rock 2000. I used to read that. And I said, yeah, sure. So here I am going to work with him on Alpha Flight, which was incredible.
Felt intimidated because he's such a big icon and you were just a little inker still rising up in the ranks.
I was scared to death. I didn't know how it was going to turn out. This would be the first time that I would have actually seen John's pencils, and they were in my hands. They came with me back to my house. Like I had John Byrne artwork on my table, and I was there working on it. Yeah, I was scared to death until then, and I tried to just do the best job possible. And at that time, John's inking style was very thin line. He didn't really do thick and thins. So I had to try and make sure I matched his style. That's what background inkers are supposed to do.
So, what was it like working with John Byrne?
It was great. I was always intimidated. It never went away, really. I was always trying to make sure that every issue that I worked with him on, that every page that I worked with him on, looked right, and that like he would be happy and would then send me the next batch of pages, and it would just keep going like that. John was very good. If things were bad, maybe I would have heard from him, but usually the pages would just come. I just work on them, get them done, and that was it.
So, fans have a lot of preconceived notions about creators. What's something that fans get wrong about John Byrne that you could say, that's not exactly the way I saw it?
Yeah, I see him as like a curmudgeon or something like that, inaccessible. But to me, he was very generous, I have to say. He actually introduced me in the first Alpha Flight book that I did that had, I think, the premiere, who that also introduced Talisman in that book. He introduced me as his background inking assistant. Keith Williams was right there on the splash page. I was really surprised that he did that. And he continued to do that, putting my name in there. I think that helped me out a lot, that people saw my name there with John. And I think that kind of helped my career a
Did
lot.
did John ask to work with you, or did you just go along with the flow? You worked on several projects, even at Marvel, with him.
I did work with him on the Hulk also, which was really great for that moment in time. It was pretty quick. He was only on there for a number of issues.
About six.
Then the great Superman thing happened. And he recreated Superman, and he brought me on as background inker to work on Action Comics.
So he asked you to go over to work with him on Action Comics, and you just took the chance because it was, of course, it's John Byrne.
Yeah, of course, it's Byrne. Got to be kidding. Absolutely. Not too many people would get a chance to do something like that. And I felt really honored that he asked me to work with him on that.
How was it like working at DC versus Marvel?
I always feel that DC was more of like a corporate kind of company. Marvel was felt more like a mom and pop kind of thing. Their bullpens were different. Yeah.
So, what was your favorite project that you worked on over the years?
Oh wow. I gotta say, She-Hulk. I did do one West Coast Avengers with him, which I really enjoyed. But I got to really work with him on She-Hulk. That was really cool, and I really enjoyed that.
So, do you and John Byrne actually keep in touch anymore?
Not really. I don't know if there would be any kind of future project with John. I don't know exactly what he's doing right now. I did thank him though, because when the books would be in reprint, you would get like an incentive. And it would never be the background artist to get those incentives. But John worked it out in a way so that I would get incentives whenever Alpha Flight was in a trade, or the Hulk or Action Comics, and I would get
So,
some books from them, and also get a little bit of cash.
John Byrne liked that with all of his collaborators, or were you somebody unique and special?
I don't know. I don't think that he did it with anybody else, especially when it came to backgrounds. No, I was the first. I just felt very lucky.
So, Keith, what are you doing lately these days? Are you just retired and kicking back and chilling?
Artists don't retire. We don't retire. What are you talking about? No, no, I'm going to be doing this for forever. I really do enjoy it. I'm still learning how to do it. It's always fun for me. It's never really boring at all. Sometimes it gets a little tense, and sometimes there's still some deadlines, but I really do enjoy it. What I'm doing right now, I'm doing at this moment covers for independents. Like I've worked for Green Archer, who does things like Johnny Dollar and The Clock, and Buck Rogers, which I did a cover for just recently. And I think that's been shown a few times on Instagram and Facebook. So that'll be coming out soon. Also, working with another company, did a homage on the Warlock Chronicles #1 cover that was done by Tom Rainey and me. I redrew it using their character, so that should be coming out soon. And there's a few other stories that I did for that company that I can't show, unfortunately, yet. But they're coming out soon also, and I'm also inking a cover for that company too at this moment. But I'm also doing a whole bunch of commissions. I go to conventions almost like every week, and yeah, that's at the moment how I'm making my living right now.
Have you ever thought about teaching yourself for art people?
I've thought about it, but I really don't have the time to do that. Oh, I'm also working on comic strip for a magazine called A Kid in a Comic. Oh, let me show you. There you go.
And who is that for?
That is for a group. I'm trying to remember exactly, but it's a comic strip thing like they used to have on Sundays. They used to wrap around the newspaper like the Daily News and things like that. John Konacki is the person who's putting this together, and it's with a lot of other different artists like Scott Hanner and a bunch of other guys. We're putting together stories, and actually, my character, which is Elva, which is right here. I don't know if you can see it, but that's Elva. And she's a character that I created back when I was at Will Eisner's class. Never thought that it would actually ever get published. I did write a graphic novel, like partially, and I decided when they asked me if I was interested in doing that, and like I said, yeah, I'll use that character finally, get it published.
Before we wrap this up, you get the final words. Any closing comments?
You could find me at a lot of different conventions. Actually, I'm going to be at one this weekend, Garden State. Look it up on Facebook and Instagram, and I'll be putting out an advertisement for it. Instagram is Keith Williams Comic Book Art. Facebook is Keith Williams. I'm usually the guy that's there smiling like this. It's terrible.
Keith Williams, legendary inker for many decades. Thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, guys.